Hi, welcome to a completely new session. In this session and in this series, we are going to study about backend, and the technologies that I will be studying will be Java plus Spring Boot. So let's start. So in first session, we are going to study about Spring Boot, the basics, the interview questions and answers from GFG article. Let me check if my mic and video is clearly visible or not. Yes, it is. So this first shift will be from half hour, not will be from not will be of half hour. So let's start. And we have Spring Boot interview question and answer. Spring Boot is a Java based framework used to develop standalone production ready application with minimal configuration. Introduced by Pivotal in 2014, it simplifies the development of Spring application by offering embedded server, auto configuration, and fast startup. Many top companies, including Accenture, Netflix, Amazon, and Google, rely on it for its performance and ease of development. So, what we have studied about Spring Boot, like it is a Java based framework which is used to develop standalone production ready application with minimal configuration. Let me write something side by side in my notes. So I will be sharing my notes for sure. Okay. Let me check if my video and camera is working properly or not. Yes, it is. Let's start. So today is 28th November. Starting with Om 28/11/2025. Backend, we have started with the Spring Boot. From the GFG article. Okay, not. So it is a Spring Boot is a Java based framework. Okay, let me write it. First point, it is a Java based framework. Okay, in the end of this session, I will be sharing my notes, my handwritten notes for sure. Then, which is used to develop standalone production ready application with minimal configuration. It requires minimal configuration. That is the one of the best part for it. In the later part of our journey of preparation, when we go through like whenever we face some difficulty while working with the Spring Boot, we will be remembering this line like, hey, in GFG article it was written it requires minimal configuration. It was introduced by Pivotal in 2014. It simplifies the development of Spring application by offering embedded servers. It offers embedded servers. Offers embedded servers. Okay. Auto configuration. It offers auto configuration and fast startup. Okay. Many top companies, including Accenture, Netflix, Amazon, and Google, rely on it for its performance and ease of development. Like basically, minimal configuration and ease of development. Okay. Next part, let's start. In this guide, we provide comprehensive Spring Boot interview question for both fresher and experienced developer. It covers essential topics such as core Spring concept, REST APIs, microservices, auto configuration, embedded servers, monitoring, and error handling, helping you to prepare for any Spring interview questions with confidence. So let's start. What is Spring Boot? Like first question is, what is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is built on top of the Spring framework to create standalone RESTful web application with minimal or very less configuration, and there is no need of external servers to run the application because it has embedded servers like Tomcat and Jetty, etc. Spring Boot framework is independent. It creates executable Spring applications that are production grade. Okay, so Spring Boot is built on top of Spring framework to create standalone RESTful web application. It is built on top of it is built on top of Spring framework. It is built on top of Spring framework to create a standalone RESTful web applications with very minimal configuration, and there is no need of external servers. So like Spring Boot is built on top of Spring framework, which is used to create standalone RESTful web application. No external servers required, because we have discussed it earlier also, like in Spring Boot. Let me check if my mic and video is working properly or not. Yeah, like we have discussed in the starting of this session also, like it offers embedded servers, so it does not require any external server to run the application. Okay, no external servers required. Okay, embedded servers, it has embedded servers, it has embedded servers like Tomcat. Yeah, name is very fancy and very common. And Jetty. Hey Jetty. So we can say that Spring Boot framework is independent. Yeah, we can say that it is independent. We can say why? Because it does not require any external server to run. It creates executable Spring application that are production grade. What are the features of Spring Boot? There are many useful features of Spring Boot. Some of them are auto configuration. It automatically configures dependencies by using enable auto configuration annotation and reduces boilerplate code. It's Spring Boot starter POM. These starters POMs are pre-configured dependencies for functions like database, security, Maven configuration, etc. CLI, command line interface. This command line tool is generally for managing dependencies, creating project and running the application. Actuator, it provides health checks, metrics, and monitors the endpoints of the application. It also simplifies the troubleshooting management. Embedded servers like Tomcat and Jetty for quick application, no need of external server. This is the features. Yeah, we can draw the diagram because we get very less chance opportunity to draw flow charts in this journey, but yeah, whenever we get the opportunity, we will try to use it. So the features of Spring Boot. Features of Spring Boot. Yeah, we have a Spring Boot which is a easy configuration. Yeah, let me write exact points. Auto configuration, then we have Spring Boot starter POM, Spring Boot Starter POM. Then we have CLI, command line interface, command line interface. Then we have actuator. Then we have embedded servers. Like Tomcat and Jetty. Yeah. So auto configuration, Spring Boot automatically configures dependencies by using enable enable auto configuration annotation and reduces boilerplate. Okay. So inside auto configuration we can write auto configuration. It enables automatically configures dependencies, automatically configures dependencies, automatically configures dependencies, okay, by using enable, then a capital auto configuration, okay, and reduces boilerplate code. Spring Boot starter POM. These starter POMs are pre-configured dependencies. Starter POM, okay, starter POM, which are pre-configured dependencies, pre-configured dependencies, okay, for functions like database, security, Maven configuration, etc. Then we have CLI, command line interface, managing dependencies, command line interface, managing dependencies, creating projects and running the application. Then we have actuator. It provides health check, metrics, and monitors the endpoints of the application. It simplifies the troubleshooting management, simplifies the troubleshooting management, okay. Then we have embedded servers, okay, double D servers. No need of external servers, okay. These are the features of Spring Boot auto configuration. It automatically configures dependencies by using enable auto configuration annotation and annotation, and reduces boilerplate code. Spring Boot starter POM. These starter POMs are pre-configured dependencies for functions like database, security, Maven configuration, etc. Then we have Spring Boot CLI, command line interface. This command line tool is generally for managing dependencies, creating projects, and running the applications. Actuator. Spring Boot actuator provides health check, metrics, and monitors the endpoints of the application. It also simplifies the troubleshooting management. Embedded server. Spring Boot contains embedded servers like Tomcat and Jetty for quick application run, no need of external servers. What are the advantages of using Spring Boot? Spring Boot is a framework that creates standalone production grade Spring based application. So this framework has many advantages, easy to use. The majority of the boilerplate code required to create a Spring application is reduced by Spring Boot. Rapid development, Spring Boot's opinionated approach and auto configuration enable developers to quickly develop apps without the need for time consuming setup, cutting down on development time. Scalable, Spring Boot apps are intended to be scalable. This implies they may be simply scaled up or down to match our application's need. Production ready. Metrics, health checks, and externalized configurations are just a few of the features that Spring Boot includes and are designed for use in production environment. Third one is advantages of Spring Boot. Advantages of Spring Boot. I will be writing my notes very quickly. I will not be writing whole part, just the important one. Standalone production grade Spring based applications, easy to use, rapid development, scalable, production ready. What are the key components of Spring Boot? The key components of Spring Boot are Spring Boot starters, okay. Then we have auto configuration, then Spring Boot actuator, then Spring Boot CLI, then embedded servers. Why do we prefer Spring Boot over Spring? Spring Boot, what is Spring Boot? It is built on the top of Spring framework. Spring Boot is built on the top of Spring framework. So the difference between Spring and Spring Boot, okay, Spring and then Spring Boot. Spring is more complex. Spring Boot is easier, less production ready. Spring less production ready, more production ready. Less scalable, more scalable in Spring Boot. Slower, faster, less customizable, more customizable. The internal working of Spring Boot. Here are the main steps in how Spring Boot works. Start by creating a new Spring Boot project, adding the necessary dependencies, annotate the application with appropriate annotations, run the application. These are the like working. How does the Spring Boot work? So how the Spring Boot works. So first, new project, okay, new project, then what? then necessary dependencies. Okay, necessary dependencies. Okay, then annotate the application, annotate the application, then run the application. New project, necessary dependencies, and then annotate the application with the appropriate annotations, then run the application. Yeah. What are the Spring Boot starter dependencies? Spring Boot provides many starter dependencies. Some of them are which are used the most in Spring Boot application. Like, what are the starter dependencies we have talked about? Like, they provide starter dependencies, so we do have to write less code. That is, these are pre-configured dependencies, which are data GPA starter, JPA starter, web starter, security starter, test starter, and thymilif starter. These are the Spring Boot application dependencies. Okay, Spring Boot starter dependencies. First one is data JPA starter, data JPA starter, web starter, third one security starter, fourth one test starter, fifth one thymilif starter. These are some starter pack dependencies. How does a Spring application get started? A Spring application gets started by calling the main method with a Spring Boot application annotation in the Spring application class. This method takes a Spring application builder object as a parameter, which is used to configure the application. So let me tell you slowly. Like, question is, how does it work? Like, we have seen the process. Like, we have to create a project, then add necessary dependencies, then annotate the application, and then finally we run the application. But go inside more, like how actually it works. Let's start. A Spring application gets started by calling the main method. So first of all, Spring application, if we want to start a Spring application process. Okay, so what do we start with? Firstly, we will call the main method, calling the main method. Okay, calling the main method. Okay, with @Spring Boot application annotation in the Spring application class. Okay, Spring Boot application annotation in the Spring Boot application class. So firstly, we call the main method with @Spring Boot application annotation in the Spring application class. This method takes a Spring application builder object as a parameter, which is used to configure the application. Then we take Spring application builder. Okay, Spring application builder object as a parameter, which is used to configure the application. Once the Spring application object is created, the run method is called. Whenever we create a Spring application object is created, whenever we create a Spring application object is created, the run method is called. Run method is called. Okay. Run method is called. Okay. Once the application context is initialized, when the Spring application object is created, the run method is called. Once the application context is initialized, then application context is initialized, run method, the run method starts the application's embedded web server. Okay, so like these are the steps. First, what happens? Main method is called with the Spring Boot application annotation in the Spring Boot application class. Then Spring application builder object works, which takes this method like main method, then Spring Boot annotation in the Spring application class. This method takes Spring application builder object as a parameter, which is used to configure the application. Once the Spring application object is created, the run method is called. Once the application context is initialized, the run method starts the application's embedded web server. Like this is the code. Like import org.springframework.boot.spring application, org.springframework.boot autoconfigure.spring application. Okay, then Spring Boot application public class my application void main string args spring application dot run my application class args. Let me tell you, like, let me explain this part by the help of ChatGPT. Control C. Okay. Let me see like how much time we have spent. So we are near to the end of this session. So let me complete it fastly. Explain the code by the help of description given. So Spring Boot application annotation starts the, okay, so as we have told you, like Spring Boot annotation in the Spring application class, this annotation Spring Boot application, okay, it starts the Spring Boot application. The class my application is marked with Spring Boot application. This annotation tells Spring that this is the entry point of the application. It enables component scanning, auto configuration management. Main is the starting point. Like any Java application, execution begins from the main method. In Spring Boot, the main method is responsible for starting the Spring application as described. Spring application.run initializes the Spring environment. My application.class. This is equivalent to creating a Spring application builder, as means Spring application builder, which as a parameter it performs creation of Spring application object, initialization of application context loads beans configuration, running auto configuration, preparing the application to start. After the application context is ready, the embedded server starts. Once the context is fully initialized, the run method starts the embedded web server. Tomcat JT Undertow hosts REST APIs or web pages. One second. Host APIs. Once the application context is initialized, the run method starts the application embedded web server. Application is now running. After all steps are done, the application become active and ready to accept HTTP requests. Yeah. So at this point, I am ending the first half of this session. Not ending this session, I will be continuing from question number 9, which is this one. And yeah, till then, be positive, smile and positive. So we have completed our first stop, that is of half hour. Best of luck. Hi, hello, welcome back. So I have returned after having dinner. Yeah, coming back, we have discussed till 8, which was the first session for Spring Boot or Java. And let me see how many questions are there for fresher from Spring Boot. Like, there will be very large set of questions because it is a very quite popular framework. Yeah, this is around 36. So we have completed 8 out of 36. That is somehow some near about 25, I guess. If it would be 32, then exactly 25%, but it is 36, so little less than 25%. That is, let me check, 4 by 18, it's 2 by 9, and 110, it's near about 20 to 25%. Yeah. And so let me go further, and let us try to solve more and more questions from this one. I will be wrapping up this session little quick because it is getting too late at night. It is around 10. Yeah, so yeah, let's start first. What does the Spring Boot application annotation do internally? The question is, like, we have studied what does Spring Boot application do. This one. Let's start. The Spring Boot application annotation combines 3 annotations. Those 3 annotations are configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan. Auto configuration, this annotation automatically configuring beans in the class path and automatically scans the dependencies according to the application need. Component scan, this annotation scans the component, example component service in the package of annotated class and its sub packages. Configuration, this annotation configures the beans and packages in the class path. At the rate, Spring Boot application automatically configures the application based on the dependencies added during project creation and the bootstraps the application by using a run method inside the main class of an application. Okay, so what does Spring Boot application annotation do? So this one line summarizes all of these. This part, 81 at the rate Spring Boot application is equal to at the rate configuration plus at the rate enable auto configuration then component scan. Auto configuration This annotation automatically configuring beans in the class path, okay, and automatically scans the dependencies according to the application need. Component scan. This annotation scans the component service in the package of annotated class and its sub packages. Configuration. This annotation configures the beans and packages in the class path, not automatically. Spring Boot application automatically configures the application based on dependencies added during project creation and bootstraps the application by using run method inside the main class of an application. Okay. Then we have what is Spring Initializer. Spring Initializer is a tool that helps us to create a skeleton of Spring Boot project or project structure by providing a Maven or Gradle file to build the application. It set up this framework from scratch. So what does Spring Initializer do? Instead of writing whole framework structure of Spring Boot, what does it do? It provides the boilerplate, you can say, or the initializer set of code which makes it easier for us to start the application. So Spring Initializer is a tool that helps us to create a skeleton of Spring Boot project or project structure by providing a Maven or Gradle file to build the application. It set up the framework from scratch. Okay. Spring Initializer. It creates a skeleton of Spring Boot project. As the name suggests or reminds or suggests that it helps us to create skeleton of Spring Boot project. What are Spring Boot CLI and the most used CLI commands? Spring Boot CLI, command line interface. Command line interface is a command line that can be used to run, manage Spring Boot application. CLI is used to either create or run or manage what? Spring Boot applications. Manage Spring Boot applications. Okay. It is a powerful tool that can help us to get started with the Spring Boot quickly and easily. It is built on the top of Groovy programming language. Spring Boot command line interface is built on Spring Boot. Spring Boot command line interface is built on Groovy programming language. Groovy programming language. Okay. Groovy programming language. And what are the most used CLIs? Most used CLI are run, test, then we have jar, then we have war, then we have init, then we have help. Okay, these are the beginner, these questions. Until now we have covered all the beginners question. Then we have intermediate interview questions. Okay, intermediate questions. Let's start. What are the basic Spring Boot annotations? First one is Spring Boot application. This is the main annotation used to bootstrap a Spring Boot application. We have studied just now about Spring Boot application. It combines configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan. It is typically placed on the main class of the application. Okay, first one. Then second one, basic Spring Boot annotations. We are talking about basic Spring Boot annotations. First one, Spring Boot application, Spring Boot application, okay, which combines of, as we have studied earlier, configuration, then we have enable auto configuration, then we have component scan, configuration. This annotation is used to indicate that a class contains configuration methods for the application context. Second one is configuration. This annotation is used to indicate that a class contains configuration methods for the application context. It is typically used in combination with at the rate bin annotations to define beans and their dependencies. There must be something about beans. We will be studying that. Okay, so at the rate configuration is used in combination with at the rate bean annotations to define beans and their dependencies Okay, then we have component at the rate component. This annotation is the most generic annotation for Spring managed component. It is used to mark a class as a Spring bean that will be managed by the Spring container. What does the component annotation do? It mark a class as a Spring bean. Mark a class as a Spring bean that will be managed by. So like there is a class, then there comes a configuration at the rate configuration annotation, which will mark this class as a Spring bean that will be managed by the Spring container. Then we have at the rate REST controller, This annotation is used to define a REST controller, define a RESTful web service controller. It is used to define a RESTful web service controller. It is a specialized version of the at the rate controller annotation that includes the response body annotation by default. At the rate REST controller is a specified specified version of at the rate controller annotation that includes at the rate response body annotation by default. Okay. At the rate request mapping this annotation is used to map HTTP requests. Request mapping is used to request or used to map. It maps what? HTTP requests to a specific method. It maps HTTP requests, like there are some HTTP requests, it maps to a specific method in a controller. Okay, so request mapping is used to map HTTP requests to a specific method in a controller. It can be applied at the class level to define a base URL for all the methods in the class, or at the method level to specify a specific URL mapping, like we will be seeing further when we will be creating practical applications using Spring Boot. So request mapping, this annotation is used to map HTTP requests to a specific method in a controller. It can be applied at the class level to define a base URL for all methods in the class, or at the method level to specify a specific URL mapping. What is Spring Boot dependency management? This is an important term. Spring Boot dependency management makes it easier to manage dependencies in a Spring Boot project. As the name suggests, dependency management. It makes sure that all necessary dependencies are appropriate for the current Spring Boot version and are compatible with it. To create a web application, we can add the Spring Boot starter web dependency to our application. Like first we have Spring Boot application, add dependency to Maven pom.xml Gradle build Gradle downloads from Maven Central stores in this used in Spring Boot application. Spring Boot dependency management. It makes it easier to manage dependencies in a Spring Boot project. It makes sure all the necessary dependencies are appropriate for the current Spring Boot version and are compatible with it. Yeah, we can understand, like we can write it also. What is Spring Boot dependency management? Manage dependencies in a Spring Boot project and make sure all the dependencies works or compatible with it. Okay, like we can draw this flowchart like we have mentioned it earlier also. Whenever we get the chance of drawing flowchart, why not use it, because we will be getting less chance. We have a Spring Boot application where we add dependency to Maven. First one, Maven, which is pom.xml. Then we have Gradle, which is build.gradle. Then we have downloads from Maven, downloads from Maven Central, which stores in M2 repository, used in Spring Boot application. So yeah, we have completed up to question number 13. Still we have left with 32 minus 13, which is 19 questions. Yeah, 19 questions still left, and the duration of this session is around 50 minutes. Still we can push it 10 minutes more and cover more and more questions. So yeah, let's start. Like, next question is it possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server in the Spring Boot? Like, we have studied, Spring Boot provides embedded servers like Tomcat and Jetty. Now the question is it possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server? Yes, answer is yes. It is possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server in Spring Boot application. The simple way is to set the server dot port property in our application dot properties file. For example, set the port to 8081, add the following property to the application dot properties file, which is server dot port dot equal to 8081. This is a good question. Can we change it? Like, question is it possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server? We have embedded Tomcat server in Spring Boot. Okay. How we can change it? By going to application dot properties file. Here we can go to application dot properties file. Then we can go to server dot port is equal to 8081 or anything else. Okay. So the question is like, yes, it is possible to change the port of the embedded Tomcat server in a Spring Boot application, and the simplest way is to set the server.port property in our application.properties file. For example, to set the port to 8081, we can add the following property to the application.properties.file, which is equal to server.port is equal to 8081. Okay. Now the next question is, what is the starter dependency of the Spring Boot module? Spring Boot starters are a collection of pre-configured Maven dependencies that makes it easier to develop particular types of application. These include dependencies, version control, configuration needed to make certain features. To use a Spring Boot starter dependency, we simply need to add it to our projects.pom.xml file. For example, to add the Spring Boot starter web app dependency, we can add the following dependency to the pom.xml file. Dependency on off, this on off, group ID on off, artifact ID on off, org.springframework.boot, Spring Boot starter wave. Like, what is the Spring Boot starters? The next question is question number 15, which is Spring Boot starters. Spring Boot starters are a collection of pre-configured Maven dependencies. It is a collection of pre-configured Maven dependencies. Pre-configured Maven dependencies that makes it easier to develop particular type of applications. These include dependencies. It includes Spring Boot starters. It includes Spring Boot starters include dependencies, then version control, third one configuration needed to make certain features. To use a Spring Boot starter dependency, how to use a Spring Boot starter dependency? Question is how to use Spring Boot starter dependency. How we can use Spring Boot starter dependency? We can add some code. There is some code to add code in pom.xml file. We have to write some code which is dependency on off, group id on off, artifact id on off, org.springframework.boot Spring Boot starter web to our pom.xml file. What is the default port of Tomcat in Spring Boot? The default port in Spring Boot Tomcat is 8080. We can change, like we have studied, like we can change by adding the setting the server.port equal to, by setting server.port equal to 8018 in our application.properties file. Yes, so this question is straightforward. What is the default port of Tomcat in Spring Boot? Default port of Tomcat in Spring Boot is 8080. Okay, we can change it. We have studied. Now the next question, can we disable the default web server in the Spring Boot application? Yes, we can disable the default web server in the Spring Boot application. To do this, we need to set the server.port property to -1 in the applications.properties file. If we set server.port is equal to -1, then we are disabling the default web server. Okay, so if we go to our application.properties file, if we go there and if we change server.port is equal to -1, what we are actually doing? We are disabling the default web server. We are disabling the default web server in the Spring Boot application. That is great. How to disable a specific auto configuration class? To disable a specific auto configuration class in a Spring Boot application, we can use the annotation @enable auto configuration annotation with the exclude attribute. Okay, if we want to disable a specific auto configuration class, if we want to disable a specific auto configuration class, how we can do it? By setting this enable auto configuration exclude is equal to class name. The specific name of that particular specific auto configuration class which we want to disable. Can we create a non-web application in Spring Boot? Yes, we can create a non-web application in Spring Boot. Spring Boot is not just for web application. We can create applications like microservices, console applications, and batch applications. So yeah, non-web application can also be created. One second. Yeah, sorry for the pause. Yeah, so we were starting like Spring Boot Spring Boot is used for what? Web application. It is used for web application, non-web application also, non-web application like microservices, console applications, and batch applications. Yeah, so we can say that Spring Boot can be used to create non-web applications also, like microservices, console applications, and batch applications. It is not only for web application. No, Spring Boot is multitasking. It can be used for non-web application also. So with that said, we have completed till question number 19, and total we have 32 questions. I think 33 questions. 30 no. Sorry. Total we have 36 questions, and we have completed till 19, and the duration is around 1 hour. So I think that comes to the end of this session. So this is the end of first session of Spring Boot, where we have discussed around 19 questions. We have studied the basics of the Spring Boot. In next session I will be continuing this, and after that for sure I will be coming up with the practical uses of Spring Boot. With that said, I am ending this first session of our Spring Boot series. So best of luck, be positive, smile and positive. Thank you.